Anyway, please welcome out to the I'm Explained program, Carl Jeffers. Good morning, Mr. Jeffers.
Good morning, Don. You look real comfortable out there on the ranch. And
I'm not, Carl. I can't breathe. Shut up.
Okay. Well, then, if as they say, it's better to look good than to feel good, and you certainly look good, Don. So I can give you that
that's very
much.
nice of you to say, Carl.
Okay.
Carl,
Unbelievable.
you know, this Arizona immigration thing,
Yes.
I am so sick of talking about it because I don't care about it. Why should I?
Well, actually, Don, I think this is an example of what, in fact, you and I have been doing for the last couple of years. We've been talking about the need for more of a conversation about race.
Yeah.
But what I've seen in the last couple of days in the response to this, we have a bigger problem even in America now. We're not having a conversation, period, about anything. And this immigration issue demonstrates that. And it kind of gets me completely off the mark of thoughts that I had. But this is important. I was in last night at the hotel in New York, and the Fox was right next to MSNBC. So it was easy to go back and forth, which I normally don't do. And it occurred to me, if you looked at the MSNBC coverage, the impression you got was that the Supreme Court not only ruled invalid every single aspect of the law, but essentially declared the state of Arizona off limits and was sending out a federal posse to arrest Governor Jan Brewer. If you moved the channel over one to Fox, frankly, and they were interviewing there, they had Liz Cheney on, you would think that the Supreme Court not only upheld every aspect of the law on immigration in Arizona, but in fact would rule that Governor Brewer should be, by fiat, declared president of the United States.
No.
And it hit me, Don, that many Americans all over the country were tuning in to MSNBC only to be reinforced in their notion that the Supreme Court was evil, Arizona was evil, and to be comforted that the entire law was struck down. Meanwhile, many Americans, perhaps in greater numbers, some would argue, but that's another discussion for another day, were tuning into Fox to be reassured and recomforted that, in fact, the law was being upheld. And there's nobody talking in the middle to be able to get people to understand and have a conversation.
Which show on Fox were you watching?
I'm sorry?
Which show on Fox were you watching?
Actually, it was Hannity, and he was interviewing Liz Cheney. And on the MSNBC side, it was Lawrence O'Donnell with his guest. And I love Lawrence O'Donnell, and there's nothing problem with Hannity. I'm just talking about that they were driving everybody to either end.
So you're watching two opinion programs.
Yeah, but that's the point. That's what most Americans consider to be news. They consider that to be their news, Don.
Really?
And we don't get an opportunity to have a real discussion. Let me just give you a quick example. You know? I mean, here's the thing. Here's what the Supreme Court actually did, Don. The Supreme Court said that in those areas where it affects national immigration policy, the states do not have the right to implement their own policy, and so those aspects of the Arizona law were declared invalid. But they also said that in those areas where the police and state enforcement have identified or have reason to believe that a person has been involved in a crime or is committing a crime, that they have the right to also inquire about their legal status. That was essentially what they said. And they also said that in the future, that part of the law that they upheld, they will be monitoring closely to see if Arizona complies in a way that keeps it within constitutional grounds. But if you listen to all the commentary, you don't get that. And of course, you're not listening right now, but I hope you're enjoying that nap out there because I look forward to being able to talk about
you're saying.
Oh, God.
Carl continues.
Well, I'm just saying I didn't want to interrupt the nap, but you could almost sleep through it.
Nobody gives it. You are right about the conversation part, though. So nobody's talking about it. They're just hollering at each other, and I don't know. So.
Yeah, and the sad thing is that as a result, Don, when you said in the beginning, why should I care? Because we're not having the kind of proper conversation somewhere in the middle, then most Americans won't care because they either will be reinforced in their position that's pretty strident, or they won't hear anything that makes sense to them, so they won't care. And that you hit it right on the head there.
Okay, the president asked the feds not to help Arizona with these illegal detainees, even after this unanimous Supreme Court vote. And my question is, what did the president ask the feds not to help Arizona do?
Well, essentially, what the president is saying is that to the extent that Arizona was, in the judgment of the Justice Department, usurping national prerogatives in terms of immigration law enforcement, that the federal government will not be part of implementing that or assisting Arizona in doing that. Because, for instance, the example is, Don, if I'm jaywalking in Arizona, you can arrest me for jaywalking, and you then, as a result, have the right to inquire about my immigration status, but it can take no more time than it takes normally for me to be involved in the jaywalking process. So if you add an extra day to inquire about my immigration status beyond what it normally takes to inquire about jaywalking, that could be unconstitutional, and the court is saying they're going to monitor that. The federal government is not going to assist Arizona in making those kinds of activities. And here's the point, Don. Elena Kagan, the most recent appointee to the Supreme Court, recused herself. She did not vote on this because she was previously Solicitor General. Yeah. It is quite likely that now that she recused herself on this decision, if it comes back again for review based on monitoring and also based on racial profiling and civil rights violations that will likely be the next level of charges that could make their way to the Supreme Court, Elena Kagan may very well feel that because she recused herself on this decision, she could participate in the next round of judicial review at the level of the Supreme Court, and that could tip it the other way to make it an even more emphatic reversal of that decision there.
Do you think, Carl, that there's anything wrong in asking these suspects to show their papers?
To show their papers?
Yeah.
I think that in America, I believe in enforcement of the law, and if you are guilty or perceived to be violating an existing law, then that's what the law enforcement focuses on. Now, we do know that if they pull you over, they can search your car, search your trunk, and if you were pulled over for speeding and they find drugs, marijuana, or something, that you can be prosecuted for that. There's just something that I'm very uncomfortable about with this particular activity because of the fact, Don, that it suggests a specific targeted group of Americans are more likely to be candidates for these types of searches, and that becomes a really close, slippery slope to racial profiling, and I have a great concern about it. But you see, the way you and I are talking about it, Don, would be helpful for more Americans to have the conversation in this way and not the other way.
All right, let's say, let's say the cops pull a suspect over for a legitimate reason.
Okay.
Legitimate reason.
Right.
They run a red light or they whatever. Well, they run a red light.
Sure.
So then do you favor or do you support then asking them if they're legal and then asking them to support an affirmative answer with their papers?
Well, first of all, I don't favor it at all personally, to answer that part of the question, nor do I support it. However, I do accept the notion from a legal perspective that if a person, because we have this established in American jurisprudence and in law enforcement throughout the country that affects all of us, white, black, brown, or whatever, if you are pulled over or stopped because of a legitimate violation, that the law enforcement does have the right to look for other things like marijuana, like a hidden weapon, that kind of thing, I think you could make the argument that this would entitle you to do that. The problem in Arizona was that Hispanics had the perception that the police would pull them over because they looked Hispanic. And as a result, they figured there was a higher probability of being able to find a violation of immigration. That's the problem, and that's where the constitutional issue has to still be addressed.
But the people who live in Tucson and in some of those other areas of Arizona down there close to the border, who face a horrific situation with being robbed and those kinds of things,
right,
and various kinds of crime,
right,
by illegal immigrants primarily, will have a quite different feeling about all of this. So.
That's true, Don, but without question, if we're talking about people who rob, steal, plunder farmland and the individual property of Americans, it doesn't matter what their immigration status is. They need to be apprehended and prosecuted under the laws on the books against those specific statute violations, and there's plenty of law that would take care of the penalties and the remedies for that, and they don't need to even deal with the other aspect of it. They're criminals.
But the people on the borders feel that the immigration is not being enforced, and we've got a porous border. And when they do get here, nobody's checking up on them. So that's their position. I understand your position. If somebody's committing a crime, regardless of who they ought to be arrested and prosecuted and all that sort of thing. So
right, and I must say, Don, that the Supreme Court yesterday did, in fact, uphold the principle that whether you are comfortable or unhappy with the activity on the border with regard to enforcement, it is not the state's prerogative nor their responsibility. That's the federal government's.
Are you married, Carl?
No.
Would you be willing to go out with Tamara Holder?
Anybody who's nice, who has a mesh of personality, enjoys good music, likes LeBron James, likes Tiger Woods, likes Duke Ellington and Frank Sinatra, I think we could certainly have a nice evening.
She wears a necklace of handcuffs. Does that concern you?
It doesn't concern me unless she tries to brace them around me. I mean,
okay.
How about
the gag ball in her purse?
Oh, that'll be fine. Carl Jeffers here on the Imus Morning Program, 11 till the hour.